Hi all, welcome back to Environmental Science. And today we're just going to continue talking a little bit about hunger issues and about population crashes that are related to potentially overproduction of humans and underproduction of food. And then we're going to talk about technology. Maybe technology is the answer. Maybe GMOs are the answer. Maybe CRISPR technology is the answer. But regardless, we'll talk about ways at which maybe what's going on in technology can help with preventing or decreasing the amount of hungry individuals on the planet. And this is a pretty telling picture, I think, is, if you use a wild type tomato that's not genetically modified or CRISPR altered, if you look at the shelf life, it's kind of crazy to think that 10 days it looks like this. At 20 days most people wouldn't eat it. Maybe you would cut it up and put it in like a tomato sauce or a stew maybe. And at 45 days there's a lot of fungus and other things growing on it. Here this is just a comparison of an RNA alpha and RNA beta, different GMOs. But either way, I think 45 days later, I think these tomatoes would be sold and consumed at a grocery store. So to put that in perspective, a lot of advancements in technology when it comes to food is shelf life, and that's really a big one if we're going to have commercial farms. And if you're going to have commercial farms producing things like tomatoes and then shipping those tomatoes to regions maybe in the wintertime that cannot produce any tomatoes, and that ship, if it takes 10 days just to ship it there, that gives you 10 days of shelf life maybe. But if it takes 10 days from field to shelf, then you got at least, it looks like maybe 30 days, probably 35 days for individuals to consume that material. Much longer period of time. And we'll get into, what's the cost of this? Is there a cost to the nutrition? Is there a cost to human health? Lots of things going on. Okay, so hunger and food production, just a recap, about 800 million people face hunger, 10% of the world's population roughly. We're at 8.2, 8.1 billion, and that's about 10% of the world's population is hungry. Estimates are that by 2050, we'll need about 70% more food. Okay, so there's, based on those estimates, the population is not trending lower. Okay, population of humans is still growing at an exponential rate, and so that meaning by 2050, if we're still on our same trajectory, we could be 10 billion, 11 billion. Okay, maybe 2 billion, 3 billion more people than we currently have, 70% more food production. Where's that food production coming from? Well, currently there's 4 countries that produce the majority of the food. And so China, India, US, and Brazil. So if you look at the countries that have the most people, okay, at least China and India are basically tied for being the most populated. And then the United States and Brazil, less populated, but the United States is third most populated. And so I think that's important to note, that the majority of food produced is produced in countries that have the most people. That's important. That's a good start, I think. Is that food production is coming, or is local enough that it's feeding the countries that have the most people. What does kind of this look like based on tons of food? Okay, so the United States, the darker the color, they eat more millions of tons of food. And so you can see China, India, United States, Brazil, all kind of dark. But there are definitely other countries, Mexico, that are coming in to play here, that produce quite a bit of food, but maybe they don't have as many people in need. So there's a lot of exports in those regions. Okay, and we'll kind of come back and talk about that. Part of this, though, is the carbon footprint around food production. So one of the big carbon footprints around food production is when we look at transport method. Okay? So water transport method is by far has the highest carbon footprint. Okay? And so if you are growing food in Mexico or the United States and you're shipping it across to Europe, okay, that's a huge cost. This is based on mileage. Okay, so miles of transport, food miles, about 60% of all food miles is water. Okay? Road is another 31. Rail is used a lot less, maybe 10%, and then air, not much. About 0.16%. This is probably a good sign, because when we look at how much pollution or how much carbon dioxide is emitted, air freight is by far the most carbon producing. Okay? But what we do see is that water and trucking, these heavily used transport methods, are also produce far more carbon than, say, rail. And rail at 10%, it's a dying industry, but rail is far less carbon emitting, and used to be much more heavily used as a transport method. So there are room for technological advances, like shifting some of this water and road transportation to rail. Again, air, we don't transport that much air, but it's leagues above all the other methods from a carbon dioxide emitting perspective. And of course, there's companies out there that are trying to get the emission from trucking, because it's very useful to be able to truck or use roadways to get food to each little place, versus a railway, which might get it to a region, but then you have to truck it from that anyways. And so there are companies that are trying to get trucking, like semi-trucks, to be electric or less carbon dioxide emitting, at least. Okay, you can check out that link on your own. If shipping is the problem, then why don't we just grow local? Okay, and this has been stated many, many times. Okay, and we can look at what that means for countries and what countries have started to do. And some countries have definitely been expanding, but they're expanding with the loss of habitat. Okay, so if you need to grow your own crops, then you're probably going to take the forests away. And so all of these major countries or major regions, okay, which can be multiple countries, like Oceania, which is Australia and the Philippines and New Zealand, all of them have seen deforestation increases, and depending on the region, it will tell us what they're deforesting for. Like in Africa, it's mostly cropland expansion, so to grow grains, or cassava, or some type of tuberous material. In Asia, grains. But if you look in Europe, North and Central America, okay, Oceania, South America, it's mainly for livestock grazing. Okay? And so you start to see these deforestation for different reasons. Okay, another one in Europe is urbanization, infrastructure. Okay? More people, more places to live. And so you see these different reasons. All of these regions are deforesting, but they have different purposes or different reasons to do so. Well, in essence, they have different reasons to do so. So, is it possible, though, that instead of cutting down huge swaths of land and growing crops in these big open spaces, or having huge livestock grazing yards, is it possible that we could just feed the world with small farms, backyard farms? Is that possible? Well, let's take a look at it. Okay, so first we can take a look at and say, well, how much land does one person need in order to support themselves from a food perspective? Right? And it depends on who you look at, or where you get your information from. If you look at the Food and Agriculture Organization, they say you need about 17 acres in order to self-support. Okay, and that's typically like a family of 4 would need 17 acres. Okay, but let's just say it's 17 acres per person, because some of these estimates are not based on a family of 4. Some of these estimates are based on single individuals. So if it's single individual, and you have like John Seymour, his complete guide to self-sufficiency, he says about 5 acres could do it. Aquaponic guides say if you have a greenhouse and an aquaponic system where you're growing green photosynthetic organisms on top and fish underneath, you only need 1 acre. So lots of different estimates, right? But let's just look at it and see if it's even possible. Okay, so first we might ask the question, well, what does it mean to be self-sufficient? Is that self-sufficient by you grow 70% of what you're eating, or is it self-sufficient in that you grow 100% of what you consume? And so I think it just depends on your definition of self-sufficient. Like, I think we get into this debate, this talk about food production and hunger, and whether we should move away from commercial farms and go to small farms. But then we don't talk about, well, what does that small farm have to do for self-sufficiency? Meat products, plant products, spices, okay, are all those grown in-house, or can you grow just your veggies and then trade for your meat products, or just your veggies and then sell the veggies and buy the meat products, or spices, you're not harvesting your own salts and things like that. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. Grinding your own pepper, all these things. What does it mean to be self-sufficient? Are you making your own clothes off the land? Or where does that line draw? Let's just say it's food production, and only food production. So, can everyone grow their own, or at least be community growers? So could you set up a community and everyone have this kind of community where all the individuals, their backyards is enough land for them to grow the crops? Maybe they have a community fishery where they can grow fish. Maybe they have some grazeland where they can graze animals. But as a community, you come together, and maybe someone's better at growing corn, you're better at growing lettuce, so you can trade lettuce and corn, etc. So is it possible, though? Well, right now 56% of the world lives in cities. That's about 4.5 billion people. live in cities. Okay? And most estimates suggest that, let's talk about rural areas first. So about 15% of all Americans live in rural areas. Okay? And living in a rural area could mean that it's actually better to live in a city, because rural Americans tend to have greater risks of heart disease, cancer, unintentional injuries, chronic lower respiratory diseases, stroke. And some of this might be led by individuals that tend to live in rural areas, are further away from medical facilities, so they tend to go to medical facilities less often. But other real components of it is eating right, being physically active, and then, of course, like seeing your doctor regularly or don't smoke. So some of these, wearing your seatbelt gets at that unintentional injury, but see your doctor regularly is one of the big ones. A lot of rural Americans, they wait until something happens, like a heart attack, before they go and see a doctor. And so then you're already down the track too far. And so just keep that in mind a little bit. So right now, 56% of the world lives in cities. By 2050, we're suggesting that 70% of the people in the world will live in cities. Okay, so we're moving away from being self-sufficient by far to being more urban across the world. Okay, but let's say we could reverse the process, flip it, and say, all right, now you got to grow your own food, because we're getting rid of commercial farms, or limiting commercial farms, and people are going to grow their own food. They're going to be self-sufficient. Okay? So let's do the math. Let's just say there's 8.1 billion people. Okay, it's probably 8.2 now, but 8.1. Let's take that, census of 17 acres. Okay, that would mean that we need 137.7 billion acres for the people on the planet. Okay, or we can take Seymour's estimate of 5 acres per person. So you need about 40.5 billion acres for all the people on the planet. Okay, so how many acres do we have on the planet? Well, there's 36 billion acres of land. Okay, so this includes all land across the planet. So that means there's about 4.4 acres per person. Okay? Just rough seat of the pants, we don't have enough acres to support the 8.1 billion people. Now that 36 billion includes places that are not suitable for farming at all. So anything that is orange on this map is considered predominantly unproductive land, meaning that you're not going to grow crops on that. The material that is like dark brown, or this brown color, I guess light brown, is forest material. Okay, so you could cut down a lot of these forests, but in many of these cases they're Arctic regions, so your growing season is very short. So I guess you could put greenhouses on it and run electricity to heat those greenhouses, etc. So the point being is 36 billion acres is maybe half of that, probably not even half of that, is actually suitable for farming. Okay, but let's just say 36 billion acres. Okay, 17 acres, let's do the math real quick. So 1 acre of corn is 172 bushels. Okay, so you can grow about 172 bushels. If you're using GMOs, genetically modified organisms, pesticides, fertilizers, the whole bit, basically all the technology that we've came about in the last 50-ish years, okay, if you're using the best, you can get about 172 bushels of corn off 1 acre, okay, in the Corn Belt of the United States. And we're not talking in arid regions of the United States. We're not talking in arid regions of Africa or Australia. Talking the best cropland, 172 bushels. Okay. Now, let's look at it if you're like, well, I'm not going to use pesticides because they're bad for the environment. I'm not going to use GMOs. I'm not going to use fertilizers. Okay? So if we did, and the numbers are out there, if we calculate how much without pesticides, okay, you got, about 32% loss. Okay, so about 55 bushels less. So you're down to about 116, 117 bushels if you're not going to use pesticides. If you're not going to use fertilizer, you get about another 40% loss. Okay? So you're about 70 bushels. Okay? In 1936, before GMOs, pesticides, and synthetic fertilizers were used, an acre of land in 36 gave us 26 bushels. Okay? So 140 bushels less. Okay? This is a game changer. Technology. This is why we could jump populations from 1.5 billion to 8.2 billion people. Is your food production is tremendous increase in food production. Okay? So if a family of 4 consumes about 6,500 pounds of corn, okay, I just use corn because corn numbers are there. You could do this with wheat. You can do this with lots and lots of different things. Okay, that's about 1,625 per person. So this is average. Family of 4 consumes about 6,500 pounds of corn in North America. Okay. Each bushel weighs about 56 pounds. That gives us about 29 bushels, okay, that you could get off of, or that you would need, okay? So if you went all the way back to 1936, no GMO, no pesticide, no fertilizer, you would need to buy 3 bushels of corn, or one of your 5 acres would have to be dedicated to corn only, or one of your 17 acres would have to be dedicated to corn only in order to get enough bushels to feed your family of 4. Okay? And so the question is, what do we do about increasing population? So when we're talking 1800s, we were at 1 billion people. Okay? We're talking 2011, we hit 7. 2022, which is kind of not really shown here, we hit 8. We don't have enough land on this planet for individuals to be self-sufficient. Now, could you personally be self-sufficient? Absolutely. Could your community be self-sufficient? Absolutely. But getting rid of GMOs, pesticides, synthetic fertilizer, that's a hard sell. There's going to be a lot more hungry people. Okay? So, the question is, what's the solution? Are GMOs a better solution, or are they a problem? Well, the benefits, these are the benefits, okay? So, depends on the GMO. Some are more nutritious, some are less nutritious. Some are tastier, some lose their taste. Disease resistant, drought resistant, less use of pesticides, increased food supply or shelf life, faster growing. Okay, we know at least some of the GMOs that we've generated are much better. Okay, going from 26 bushels to 170, 175 bushels an acre. That's a huge increase, and that's mainly due to GMOs. But also we can say that that's due to fertilizer and pesticides also helping out. But if you make a GMO that doesn't need fertilizer and pesticides, then maybe you could get the same turnout without the fertilizer and pesticides. The cost, though, there are costs. Okay, sometimes the GMOs cause allergies, toxic reactions. We don't know what downstream effects you might have. Okay, sometimes they transfer to native organisms. Sometimes maybe they're altering our gut biome. Okay, so your native bacteria that occur in your in your gut, they're not used to having a mixed species organism. And so next time when we come back, I'll dive into how GMOs are generated and what it means when something's called a genetically modified organism, and kind of the negative components of it, the positive components of it, and what does the actual term mean and the ways in which we get to it. Okay, next time.